Welcome to the Sowing the Seeds Sustainability panel. Thank you all for coming. We've got 45 minutes to tackle the climate emergency, which arguably isn't anywhere near long enough. But we're going to try and dig into some of the detail. We've got pretty much an all-star lineup of panelists here. So I'm primarily going to be the one asking the questions today. If you do have a question, please jump in at any time. I really hate panels where you get to the end and there's 30 seconds for questions and there's no real time and it's all compressed. So please just pop your hand up. There is a socially distanced roving mic. You're here live in person. You don't have to worry about whether you've unmuted yourself or not. Please do get involved. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So this is the sustainability session. We're going to try and get, we've all heard the slogans, our house is on fire, no music on a dead planet, a lot of resonant slogans there, but we're going to try and dig more into the detail of what the industry is doing to tackle this over the next 45 minutes. We're going to start with some introductions of the panelists. I'm going to go around, everyone can introduce themselves and give a bit of an overview as to the work they've been doing throughout this period, throughout the COVID-19 crisis. So my name is Paul Reed. I'm the Chief Executive of the Association of Independent Festivals. We're a national trade association representing around about 90 independent festivals, around about 40% or slightly more than of festivals, 5,000 capacity over in the UK. In terms of sustainability, AIF, we've got a bit of a background with some leading campaigns, including Drastic on Plastic, which is a 3-year pledge from our members to completely eliminate single-use plastic. So there's quite a substantial amount on site today, so that's something to be addressed. And we also ran a public-facing Take Your Tent Home campaign, equating that single-use plastic problem with abandoned tents and campsite waste. That's predominantly been our focus, alongside working some of the wonderful partners and organisations here. During the COVID pandemic, we've been somewhat preoccupied with the immediate survival of the independent festival sector and all that's entailed. But there has been a bit of movement during this time. So Live, which has been set up, Live's the umbrella group for the live music industry, of which AIF is a member, have set up a Live Green group, and they're working towards an industry-wide declaration and vision. So a lot of positive industry-wide conversations going on there. AIF itself has set up its own climate action group with members to talk about how we drive our strategy forward as we hopefully start to emerge from this. So that's me. I'd just like to go around to everyone and get a brief introduction and just maybe an overview of the kind of work you've been doing in the last 15 months or so in this area. We'll keep it brief because that could probably take up the whole 45 minutes, couldn't it? But yeah, Claire, could I start with you, please?
Thank you. First, it's really exciting to be here and see 3D people. It's very, very intense to say. So I'm Claire O'Neill, the co-founder of AGF, otherwise known as A Greener Festival. We started 15 years ago working with the festival industry, predominantly doing certification, advice, training, recommendations for the Greener Festival Award. And in recent years, we started working more with touring artists, suppliers, arenas, venues for the same purpose, essentially. We also run the Green Events and Innovations Conference, which was the last time probably that I was on a stage like this, maybe you guys as well, because we managed to get it under the net along with the ILMC on, I think, the 2nd of March in 2020. That's a coming together of the industry specifically on this topic. Since the pandemic, we had a group of festivals come together really to look at how we prevented losing a lot of the work that had been done over the last 15 years. For instance, if that was related to PPE and increases in single-use plastics, or people being averse to going on public transport. So we were looking at what are the threats now to the work that's already been done. That evolved quite positively into actually how can we take the opportunities from the fact that now we can see that business as usual doesn't have to be the only way, and there's a lot of opportunity for changing things. We've also been, as Paul mentioned, coming together on the Live Green group and developing the Green Arena certification, Green Touring certification, and feeling very positive actually about how things have been going.
Thank you, Claire. And I definitely want to come back to your business as usual point a bit later in the discussion as well. Chris.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name's Chris. I'm co-founder and operations director and sustainability lead for Shambhala Festival. It's been the love of my life for 20 years. And we're one of a collection of pioneering festivals in Europe in terms of sustainability practice. In terms of what we've been up to this year, we have been soul searching, I guess. We've been really looking at, is our 3 to 5 year vision radical enough? Can it be more radical? Are we really meeting the challenge that the climate crisis presents us? So obviously it's been difficult to use the festival as we would normally as a laboratory for experimentation and change and conversations. I very much see our opportunity as a festival to start and be involved with the important conversations we need to have of our time, but that has been inappropriate, and obviously we haven't had an event this year, last year. So we've been really focusing on strategy and really looking at how we can work with the themes that are emerging, such as circular economy, regeneration, which we'll be talking about in terms of who knows what that is in practical terms during this panel, I expect. We'll be really looking at what are the up and coming concepts. Do we understand what that means for us, and do we understand how we can implement that and how we can take our place in terms of the conversations? So that's the festival. I also wear a couple of other hats. One of them is the chair of Vision 2025, which is the outdoor events industry steering group for sustainability, made up of trade associations across the industry. And effectively what we do is we work directly with festivals and the industry and the supply chain, all stakeholders, to provide a knowledge base. And so with the pandemic over the last year, we haven't been able to do what we normally do in terms of giving practical advice on a day-to-day basis to how festivals might implement sustainability. So we've taken a back seat. We've been developing resources. We've got a new website being launched shortly, which is really exciting, which really ups the ante in terms of a one-stop shop knowledge base for the outdoor events industry on sustainable action. We've also kind of been working with the industry to profile leaders. So we thought the human story becomes more important than practical advice in the absence of delivering events. So we've really been working and profiling leaders across the industry with a I say new, but we launched it 8 months ago or so, the Green Leaders Q&A. And actually, we've got a partnership with Access All Areas magazine to profile those leaders and also syndicate news from Vision 2025. So we have a direct relationship with around 100 UK festivals, and we're supporting them on the journey. And also an emerging green suppliers database. That's Vision 2025. My other hat is Equilibrium, which is a charity in the live music events industry, specifically set up to support live events and all stakeholders in that industry to tackle the impacts of travel. In a nutshell, we do two things. We provide advice to manage travel more sustainably, and we support clients to make climate investments on their road to net zero. And again, strangely, with the pandemic, and a lot of people have found this that I've spoken to, with an under-resourced charity, the pandemic actually provided us with an opportunity to really take a step back, get strategic rather than just sort of keep up with what was happening on a day-to-day basis. So we've managed to rebrand and develop partnerships and really put our feet on the ground with a strategy for the next 3 to 5 years. So positives as well as negatives.
Great, thank you, Chris. Chiara.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. It's really, really good to see all your faces. So my name is Chiara. I work at a charity called Julie's Bicycle that was set up about 15 years ago, originally from within the UK music industry to help the industry tackle climate change and other environmental issues. And now we work across the music industry, but also with different parts of the performing arts, visual arts, and museums and heritage. Still providing support, consultancy, bringing people together around climate and environmental issues. And I guess we've been quite lucky in the pandemic in that we haven't really stopped. The conversation has exploded in the background. And so we've spent the last 15 months continuing to bring people together around helping understand and interpret for people who work in the music industry and in the arts some of the big movements that are happening outside this industry in terms of legal shifts, what's happening around net zero, business sustainability trends, and what that means for us in terms of how we run our events and our venues and tours. We've been digging deeper into specific issues like offsetting, or what does it mean to put a price on carbon? Is it a solution? Is it not a solution? So we put out a briefing around that. We've been running training events. We've been continuing, I think, to work with clients to do things like crunch carbon data, who, especially in this year where people are taking a break, it's sort of an opportunity to reset strategy, and we've been working with people around that. A lot of work around climate justice as well. I think in the context also of the Black Lives Matter movement, sort of broadening this conversation of climate change, asking the questions of who gets heard on climate and environmental issues in this country, who doesn't get heard, and how can we make a change and contribute to that as arts organizations and as events organizers, and also working very closely with some of the networks in the events and festival industry and in the arts on these issues, like the Live Green group that Chris and Claire mentioned, like Vision 2025. Again, looking at, okay, what do these big targets that are happening out in the rest of the world mean for our sector and our industry?
Great, thank you, Chiara. It's a slightly odd setup in that we're trying to hear ourselves. I'll put the headphones on there, but I'll remove them now. We've still got the ambient waft of all this kind of B2B conversations going on out there, but thankfully you're insulated from that with your headphones. Thank you all for that. I mean, you've touched upon several points there that I definitely want to dig into a bit more. In terms of the bigger picture, right, so the Paris Agreement, COP26, this autumn, the UN Climate Change Conference, and the UK government's 10-point green industrial strategy, do you feel that's resulting in meaningful conversations and action within our industry? I mean, to put it frankly, so, we've touched upon some of the industry-wide efforts, some of the positives, Vision 2025, Live Green, etc. But is our response adequate? Do we have quantifiable targets? And have we really grasped this systemically, in your view? So I don't know who'd like to go first. Maybe, Chiara, I'll come back to you to start with that one.
Sure. I think no, I don't think government has fully grasped this. I don't think the events industry has fully grasped what climate change actually is going to mean for us. But I do think we have reached a turning point. We have this legally binding target of net zero by 2050 in the UK. And I think that timeline is starting to come into view. So anyone who's working and in the workforce over the next 30 years, that's our job, is making that target happen. And that means also that certain shifts and changes are starting to feel a lot more tangible. So net zero by 2050 means we can't use fossil fuels for a lot of stuff. It means things like we have to have a phase-out date for when we're no longer using diesel in generators or in cars and trucks. So that suddenly is a roadmap and a milestone that we have to put in place over the next few decades. So I don't think we're there yet, but I do think we're starting to wake up to it, and I do think people are, I guess we're at a place now where it's becoming a bit more tangible, it's becoming easier to see and recognize because the timelines are within our own working lives.
Yes, I think that's a really great point. Chris, Claire, any reflections on that?
Yeah, I'd say, well, as far as the government is concerned, I mean, there are all of these objectives and there's COP coming around the corner, but then there is a reduction or a freeze on fuel duty, for example, and on short-haul flights, and yet train costs have gone up, and then there's new roads being built, there's the HS2 that's destroying ancient woodland, so it's a little bit schizophrenic at the moment as far as, yes, there's the policies, but then the others really do not match up. And that doesn't help our industry because we need to depend on the transport sector, for example. And then as far as the events industry is concerned, however, the new 78% reductions target for 2035, I think it was, which is partly a bit of posturing, I think, of the UK versus the US, should drive a bit more action that will then help our industry. But with our industry, I kind of feel like this year or the next couple of years are probably going to be a bit like, what analogy could I use? Like a whole bunch of multiple orgasms happening after 15 months of foreplay. And so it's probably going to be really messy for a couple of years with people just taking any gig that they can. But I think ultimately all of these different guidances, all of these different targets of the government are going to force other industries to help our industry to get better, and we will eventually get there. But it's moving a lot slower than it should be.
I think that may be a headline that comes out of this panel. Your analogy there, but I mean, Chris, just moving on from that slightly, what do you think our core messages are or should be as we start to emerge from this, whether it's around carbon net zero, or I know you've done a lot around the safe use of reusables, etc. And what resources can we point people towards to help kind of cut through the noise? Like, are there easy wins that people just aren't adopting because of awareness or whatever? Like, what's your take on that?
So, threading on from the last question, I agree with what's been said so far, in the sense that I can't tell how hopeful I am about where we're at as an industry. I do think that COP26 is going to provide the UK, the world, hopefully the live events industry, a real opportunity and focus to create more impetus. And we did see in 2018, 2019 a surge in interest. Attenborough Blue Planet, of course, but in our industry particularly, there's been a lot of reticence from artists to put their head above the parapet because they get taken down by media. So I think in terms of what's our challenge, what's our key focus as a live events industry, I would say we need to take this seriously, and I've often heard people speak about this in terms of our sustainability practice needs to be like health and safety was, or is rather. That's the journey we need to go on. It needs to be threaded into the DNA and thought process of literally everything we do on a day-to-day, yearly and strategic basis, obviously. But I'd go further than that. And say that we need to be accounting for carbon in the way that we run our budgets and our P&L. We have to take this seriously. We have to have a budget. So I think the next step for every single business of any shape or size in our industry, in every industry, has to be, what's your net zero action plan? And it's almost like, what's your budget? How do you get to, what's your carbon budget? How are you going to take steps towards that? So I think that's, and in terms of the practicals, because I realise that we often have quite theoretical conversations, and I'm sure it's not news to anyone here that we need to go on this journey. So I hear you that we need to get practical, and I think so. But the practicality is we get that action plan in place. That's an absolute priority, and in order to do that, we need to measure. That's the accountancy. In order to understand what we're doing, we need carbon literacy. So I think the three priorities are there, really. And then in terms of practicalities and easy wins, one of the things we absolutely know, and we've known it for a decade, from research that was done by Powerful Thinking, which is an industry project focused on sustainable energy management in the outdoor event sector, we know from their early research that one of the easiest wins is energy. So I would say that for the majority of outdoor events, based on a few conversations, and a bit of willingness, and a few decisions, easy decisions around how you manage power, that the average outdoor event can save 40% on their fuel bill. And of course, that's 40% less emissions from fuel use. So, I mean, that's the standard response to the easiest win that I can come up with.
Yes. No, thank you for that. I mean, I just...
What Chris said.
Yeah, absolutely fair, yeah.
So as far as the accounting is concerned, I think that's absolutely the nail on the head, because, like, for example, we're just putting together a proposal for a big show where we receive everybody's budgets. Are we squeaking? We receive everybody's budgets. They tell us how much equipment they need on site, how many staff, etc. And what we're asking them to also show us is, well, okay, how many kilowatts are needed, how many trucks are needed, what is the actual carbon impact of this going to be as part of the budgeting process in the beginning. And then equally, if you take a look at your offer as a supplier to an event, we're trying to get anybody that we're working with to look at their full budget for a show and translate, okay, how much of our budget is actually being spent on fossil fuel and how much of it is being spent on creativity or on people. And then you can take, for example, if you've got 32 trucks on the road or coming in for a certain piece of kit because you need to get that certain equipment there, whatever it may be, or you haven't spent the time on the design, or you need to have this many people because you don't have time to train somebody up on site. If you take that cost that is ultimately being spent on fossil fuel and instead apply it to the creative design or to the training of people that could help with diversity and inclusion as well, then your budgets start to be spending your money and putting value into creativity and into people, which is what our industry is supposed to be about, instead of always spending our money on fossil fuel, which is what we largely do at the moment. So I think that would be a great way forwards, essentially accounting for our emissions.
On budgets, Claire, I mean, obviously you work with a lot of festivals internationally across the rest of Europe as well. Do you think there's, and I don't want to bring it back to COVID, believe me, I haven't spent 15 months of every day of every hour talking about it, but do you think there's some myth busting that needs to be done around, say, the safe use of reusables and yeah, it's about, because people are, fundamentally trying to survive, they have a concern, it's back to the age-old thing of, being more sustainable affects the bottom line. So is there some education work, some myth busting to be done around that as we come out of the pandemic?
Definitely, and there is some work being done already. There's a guide about reusable hygiene that came out during the pandemic, specifically in reaction to the aversion to reusables, for example. You can get that free source online by the Sustainable Event Alliance. But then also if you look, like you said, about coupling health and safety with sustainability, if you think about it, creating a lot of plastic pollution, poisoning our waters and our air is not healthy or safe or secure. So we really need to look a bit more long term than just what is immediately in front of us if we want to survive as a species, to put it bluntly. But as far as the money is concerned and feeling like it's an extra cost, it's, if you're looking at your business and looking at your risks and looking at your longevity, you cannot go through this decade and survive as a business without having sustainability fundamentally at the core. The governments won't allow it. We've seen how quickly our industry can be shut down like that if it's seen as a threat to health and safety or to national security, let's say. Imagine if we are actually faced with our governments having a carbon budget, having restrictions on water use, having restrictions on fuel use and movement of people. They won't think twice about shutting us down. And the EU have said that already. The MEPs, I was on a panel with an MEP in January who said, if you don't have a sustainable event in the next 10 years, you don't have one. That's the choice. So it isn't a choice, basically.
Exactly. So do the right thing, but also you do not have a choice. Chiara, you were not in an agreement there. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I would just pick up on that. It is the cost of doing business now, and it will be the cost of doing business for the next 10 years. One of the things we've also been doing a lot of during the lockdown is lobbying. And a lot of behind-the-scenes conversations, again, with government departments here, but also big funders who invest in events and in the arts, people like Creative Europe. This is becoming a really big focus of these investments and of the strategic direction, especially in Europe. You've got the Green Deal, which provides this framework really of retooling the whole European economy. And we can either get on board with that or we're going to be left behind.
And the audience expect it. Just to pause there, I think we had a question from the audience. Could we get the roving mic, please, just to the front here? Could we get the microphone? The problem is the microphone person's not wearing headphones. Yeah, could we? Yeah. I think you had a question, didn't you? Yeah. Great. Just pop your headphones on so we can hear.
Oh, thank you. You have to hold it. More of an observation, really. I mean, I totally agree with Chris with regards to sustainability needing to be front and centre. of decision-making processes when it comes to organising events. But you've hit the nail on the head, to Gordon Clare's phrase, and it's down to budget. And money talks, unfortunately, and often decisions are made about money over sustainability. Event organisers, they love the idea of being green. They pay a lot of lip service to it, but when it comes down to it, they don't like the price of it. That's what we need to change, absolutely. I'm from Cube Modular. We have a system called Continest. It's a foldable container system. I can get 10, 20-foot containers on one lorry. That's an 80% saving in transport costs. Plus all the infrastructure damage that we're saving, plus we're not driving hundreds of lorries through small villages, etc., etc. But it's more expensive. It's the design that's gone into it, the technology that goes into it. It's more expensive, and not massively more expensive, 20-25% more expensive. But people don't like that, and it's a challenge, a real challenge. We love the idea of it. How much is it? Oh, we don't like it that much. Let's go back to the dirty, oily, greasy system that we've always used, and we always, and it's going to be a hell of a change to get people to change their mindset. That's what we need to achieve, and it's a challenge.
Okay, thank you. Any reflections on that?
Yeah, I really hear you. This is the nub of the challenge that we face as a society. You know, convenience, cost, choice, versus sometimes making the right decision. And in some cases, we need to stand from a moral standpoint in terms of, you know, as a business, you know, where do we stand in terms of, do we want to make a positive contribution to this world, or do we want to be part of a pretty bad story? I mean, I have to say, because this is the phrase that sort of works for me, that we're sleepwalking while our ecosystems and nature is literally being dismantled around us. And yeah, each of us as a business has a moral sort of obligation to choose where we stand. You know, it is, what side of history do we want to be on? And we need to invest, you know, and these solutions, such as yours, which I think is amazing, they do cost a bit more for a short period of time. But collectively, as an industry, we need to invest if we want to do things better. I also want to throw in the pot that my direct experience as a festival organiser who has a 1.2 million infrastructure budget for an event, is that some solutions cost more for a short period of time, but actually overall, I've viewed not just on a departmental level, but a holistic level in terms of the budget. I've reduced the operations footprint of Shambhala by 90%, and I've saved money doing it. So, of course, there are examples of things that cost more, usually in the short term, while they're being developed. But actually, overall, I'm quids in as a festival organiser, and I've got a better brand, and I've got a more loyal audience. So my real experience of this is that embracing sustainability has worked for us.
Great, thank you, Chris. Sorry, I'm just going to remove my headphones because I just hear someone randomly laughing in them. I think it was picking up a pirate radio station, or it had tuned into someone trying to land a plane over there or something. Quite disconcerting. Yeah, I do want to move on to talk about language, but yeah, do you want to make a comment before that?
I was just going to say, yes, the money talks, and that's why it doesn't have to be a hindrance, because if we can make the money work for sustainability, then it's going to lead us. And I always say that money leads action. So we need to make the money be going into the places that are more sustainable. We need to make the money be going into the choices that are more sustainable. Like, I don't believe for a second, 'cause I used to book all the ferries for Festival to get all the infrastructure on off the island. And I think I used to book maybe 80 trucks of cabins, or even, in fact, no, it's probably 120 trucks of cabins on and off, back and forth. I do not believe that costs less, ultimately. So we need to just look at the bigger picture and not be so tunnel visioned.
Definitely. Please raise your hand if you've got any other questions. We've got about 15 minutes left, to make sure if you've got a question or comment to come in. I wanted to move on to talk about language, really, and are we being inclusive enough as an industry? Are we using the right language to connect with the entire supply chain and, in fact, with audiences? I mean, it's just if you could just raise your hands as to if you know what these terms mean. Who knows what regenerative future means? Put your hands up if you do. Some people out there that do, I'm sure. You've been modest, but okay. Let's try the next one. What about net zero? Yeah. So more hands for that one. But I suppose my point is, are we sort of self-sabotaging ourselves a little bit through the use of these terms, which, you know, you're all extremely climate literate. But if we're going to have, you know, grand vision and overarching kind of declaration, it needs to be able to trickle down and translate. And Claire, you gave me a very good definition of what regenerative actually means, so you might want to share that actually on the basis of that response.
Yeah, okay.
But are we, I guess the fundamental question is, are we being inclusive enough?
So I'd say, I want to come back on the inclusive bit after these guys have spoken, but with regenerative, ultimately, if you look at net zero or carbon neutral, you're trying to, or sustainable, you're trying to stay where you are and not make as much damage. So be less damaging or don't cause more damage. Whereas if you're regenerative, it's basically the opposite to being degenerative. So instead of going out and causing destruction, you're actually going out and making things better. So regenerating through what you do. So it could be that the money that you spend or the actions that you take actually enhance biodiversity or retrofit a venue with better lighting systems than they had before, or you're leaving, they call it a handprint, I guess, or your carbon handprint. So how are you making things better through what you're doing rather than just staying in stasis? So that's what regenerative future is.
So it's putting things back in a better state than we found them, essentially.
Which is what we need to do because we've fucked things up before now.
But is the language cutting through?
I don't know. Hands up now, who knows what regenerative means?
I told you it was a good explanation.
Thanks, guys.
But I think it is a good point. Chris, Chiara, do you have any reflections on language?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that we think about a lot, and I think on one level, there are certain terms that you can't get away from needing a definition for, because it's being exact and precise about those definitions that sort of stop us from sliding into greenwash around certain things. And so I think there is a job to be done around bringing more people in the industry sort of up to a level where they have an understanding of what some of these terms mean. But then also, as with other areas, you want experts in certain areas that can make sure that, you know, certain things are done by the book, that understand the detail. And then for everyone else, you kind of just need to know what you need to do on that basis as part of your day-to-day job. So I think we can probably be better around language in some areas, but I think there's also a big job around upskilling to do for a future workforce that is ready to be a part of all these conversations, and also a space for really specific subject matter expertise that gets, I think, that needs to get a bit more recognition as well in the industry and in the sector.
Chris?
I guess the other term that I'm thinking about is circular economy. So, I mean, can you raise a hand if you feel like you understand the term circular economy? Okay, so it's another minority interest. So it's something which we've been grappling with as a business and really thinking about particularly over the last year, because we've become part of a European project of 20 festivals that are looking at what does circular mean for us as live events and how can we work together and collaborate to realise that. I guess the simplest description that I can offer with the time that we have here is that we live in a linear economy. We extract stuff from Earth, from nature, we process it, we move it, we consume it, we chuck it away, linear. And the whole concept, in a nutshell, is that we actually value materials in our economies and use them again and again and again. We'll try not to use them in the first place, of course. So that's fundamentally it. But yeah, that's been a large part of what we've been doing as a business in terms of, you know, mapping material flows. What are all the materials that we're using? Are we taking opportunities to avoid materials? Are we reusing and repurposing materials? Are we able to recycle when there's no other option? And what are the materials that at the moment may go to incineration or landfill, and what can we do about that? So that's kind of what's been on our mind.
Yeah. Great, thank you. I think we might have a question from the floor there.
Hi,
If you want to pop your headphones in.
Hi, thanks. My question's in two parts. One is what cross-industry collaboration have you had? So you mentioned transport and infrastructure. Have you been speaking to the utility sector in terms of how they're doing carbon neutral and how that impacts your events? And the second part is, in terms of a framework for due diligence in your supply chain, how are you developing that framework in order to report higher up to investors and key stakeholders?
Good questions.
So I think I can speak a little bit on utility level. I mean, as Julie's Bicycle, we have a partnership with Good Energy, who are one of the suppliers of 100% renewable electricity in the UK, and we help other businesses kind of switch their energy supply. And I think in terms of campaigns around that through Powerful Thinking and other networks, one of the big conversations that we've been trying to drive forward is the need to provide a lot more mains grid connections at event sites that get used for a lot of events. Again, so that you can start not needing as many generators because you have that electricity supply to a site that's also going to benefit as the grid in the UK continues to have more renewables on it. And again, we can cut out fossil fuels used in generators. We can switch over to that greener grid. And also the other thing that's really exciting in that space is all the battery technology that's coming online, again, which we can then charge up on a much cleaner grid and use in events. In terms of kind of supply chain engagement, I mean, Chris, you might want to pick that up as an event organizer directly, but through Vision 2025 and the other networks that Julie's Bicycle works with, I mean, one of the things we've always tried is also to give event organizers kind of the questions that they need to ask of their suppliers. So we've done that around biofuel sustainability, sort of what are the questions that you need to ask to make sure there isn't palm oil in your very nice biofuel, for example. And so being able to do due diligence around those issues. Yeah.
So very, very quickly, because I realise that we've not got much time, we're on a journey as Shambhala, as a festival business, towards making it mandatory that our entire supply chain have not just decent but pioneering standards. Now, I accept that not everyone can do that in the short term, but I will always advocate going on a journey. So some of your suppliers you may choose because they offer something pioneering like Continest. Other suppliers you might have an established and very important relationship with in history. And I always advocate that it's worth having those conversations and saying, right, in 3 years we want to be here. How can we do this together? You know, we're all on this journey together, and I think it's important to say that.
And to add to that as well, we've done very similarly to what Chiara's explained with Ecotricity working on the mains connections and also the battery technology for throughout events. But also on the transport side, we've been collaborating with some of the policymakers in transport who are looking on urban design and seeing how a big part of what they do is about behaviour change. And our industry as event spaces can really facilitate some of their trials and tests and also communication, which is where we really need to step up. And that's how we actually can help them. That's kind of like our superpower in a way. And then they can help us to be able to change the way that our audiences move around, for example. And then with the vendors or suppliers, we do certification for like arenas, festivals and so on. And then within that, we look at procurements and supply chain. So then do the greener vendor certification in order to try and get everybody aligned on the same page and the same thinking. And then between all the groups that we have where we're working together, we're all going for the same targets that are based on the scientific reality of what needs to happen collectively on climate change. So it is all happening, and more people are coming on board. And this period of groundedness, so to speak, tumulus groundedness, has really helped to push things along. So quite positive.
Great, thank you, Claire. I'm mindful of time. Has anyone got any questions, observations? The mic stands ready if you do. We've got about 5 minutes left. So please jump in now if you have. I think we've got one over here actually. Yeah, got one there. Thank you.
Hi there, thanks. I think I've had quite a few conversations with event organisers, and one of the concerns is where to start. So can you recommend to event organisers who actually want to start this journey, what they should do, because it's kind of, there's a lot to take on, and I think it's that kind of initial, right, how do I actually get started?
Good question.
And all three of us could answer that. I'll dive in if that's okay. All three of us have organisations that provide stacks of really amazing, useful, free-to-access resources, tools, information, news, links to other organisations. So I would say set aside half a day, jump on any of these websites, Vision 2025, Julie's Bicycle, the Greener Festival, and just get stuck in and start reading something. But also, from the Vision 2025 perspective, we wrote a report in 2015 called The Show Must Go On. It's an impact report for the live events industry, the outdoor events industry. And it also started the Vision 2025 project by publishing that report and looking at where's the baseline for our industry's impacts. What are the things that festival organisers and outdoor events organisers can do to be more sustainable? It naturally led us to creating a roadmap for that, and that is Vision 2025, a community of festivals going on that journey. So I would say for outdoor events organisers, read the Show Must Go On report, and it gives you a really good grounding.
Do you want to chip in?
I'd say
Resources?
for any kind of organisation, just first take a look at what you're doing now and set in some kind of systems to measure just your energy and transport at least for your organisation. But then also look, like if you're organising events, try and get rid of the meat and the dairy, and that'll be a massive impact change straight away. So go plant-based, try to switch to renewable energy or use other kind of systems and reduce the amount of transport you're using. If you're going to focus on three things, I mean the food especially is easy, just change your mind and have plant-based and you've cut loads of emissions off the bat with no extra cost.
Chiara, resources?
Yeah, I would just add to that. Like Chris said, there's loads and loads of resources out there. Have a look at the Show Must Go On report. If you want a free-to-use carbon calculator for outdoor events, there's the Julie's Bicycle Creative Green tools. You can go there. If you have some information, for example, how many litres of diesel you've used, a bit of waste stats, you can fill it in, get a carbon footprint for free as a starting point. Give responsibility to someone on the team, I think is also really useful to do, that you give them the permission to go out and spend the time on this to pull together a strategy or at least some ideas of what to do next, and take it from there really. And as Claire says, start looking at some specific areas of impact. Energy is always a big one. It's directly in your control. Transport, audience travel is another biggie, not directly under our control in the same way, but if you want to have a big impact, nudging people's behavior or changing people's behavior is a big one as well.
Kind of preempted my final question there, actually, just as to what are each of you most kind of focused on in the next couple of years? You know, is it energy consumption? Is it reuse? Is it campsite waste? Is it audience travel? Of course, it's all of those, but could you each sort of pick out a couple of areas of priority just to kind of end the session on?
I'd say, well, food, energy and transport, but also looking at what are genuinely, honestly, good, reputable drawdown or offset solutions, because at the moment we still operate in a macro environment where our actions lead to emissions, and so we're going to need to balance some of what's left over, and there's going to be a lot of investment, and we don't want that to be being pissed to the wind basically, so making sure that there's proper offsets happening.
So priorities for my business, rather than thinking about the sector, achieving completely disposables free. You'll have noticed that reusable cups on bars is becoming a norm, actually. A note on that is that we're better off as a business by doing reusables. I know it doesn't work that way at every scale, but I'd like to throw that one in there. Completely eradicating single use is a priority. Having an inspiring net zero plan, which is communicable with accessible language for our audience. The food is important for us too. I'm looking at kind of what a radical food supply chain looks like, and I think it looks like working with farms which are probably community-supported agriculture in terms of the structure of their businesses and below 5 hectares.
I mean, a big one for us is always carbon emissions, which means a big focus is always going to be energy and transport energy. But I think on top of that, a big priority for the next few years is going to be how the event sector sort of relates to some of the big policy conversations, the government departments and what's happening, making sure that we're on the right track for the policy changes that are coming in, for the technological changes that are coming in, and climate justice. So how we see the work that we do in the context of justice on a global level, because when it comes down to it, all of these conversations about climate and environment, really they're about who gets to pollute, how much they get to pollute, who pays for that pollution, and who benefits from it. And so I think bringing that ethics and that justice perspective into every conversation and every strategy plan that we have is really, really important.
I think that's a brilliant insight to end on. Does anyone have any final burning questions or comments? If not, we'll wrap up as we're just over time. Yeah, absolutely. You get the last words.
Will agree with. I'll say more.
and then we'll wrap up.
Basically, the main objective should be to have loads of fun and be really inspired that actually what we're going to do is create something amazing that's so much better than what we had before, and that we can actually be proud of leaving behind, and that we're all motivated to get behind and can be bothered to get out of bed for. Because otherwise, what's the point in any of us and anything that we're doing in our industry at all if we're not actually making things better and leaving a really good positive legacy?
And that is a very helpful note to end on. So yeah, hopefully you'll join me in thanking our wonderful speakers for the session today. Thank you all.